Sure thing. So, thank you everybody for joining us today. We are very excited to have this discussion. And so obviously everybody can see us, can hear us at this point. So that is good to know. So it looks like when we join Zoom, I can't tell if people are muted automatically or not, but just double check to make sure you're muted if you're not talking, because we don't want to have a lot of background noise. It seems pretty good so far. So I think it prompts everyone, but we're recording this discussion so that we can share it later with all of you on LinkedIn. And so today we are here to discuss collaboration within a product organization. So it's important for teams to collaborate in order for a product to succeed. Many organizations struggle with communication across departments and become too siloed. People are just throwing stuff over the wall to other departments without any input, and it causes friction that can lead to the slow deterioration of the product or even the organization. So today we are going to talk about how organizations can improve communication between departments so the products, the people, and the entire organization can thrive. So our creative partners, Chris and Wendy, will be hosting this discussion, and we are grateful to be gaining the wisdom from our four panel members that are experts in product. So first panel member we have is Justin Dauer. Thank you for joining us, Justin. Justin is the founder of Anomaly by Design, a former VP of design at CVS Health, a speaker and a thought leader in design and engagement, and a published author. His latest book, called In Fulfillment, The Designer's Journey, just came out a month ago. There it is. Chris has it right there.
Hi, folks.
So next we have Bernadette Irizarry. Bern is the Vice President of Product and Design at Sony Pictures, public speaker, and advisory board member. She's led multidisciplinary teams on large-scale projects for many years as the owner of her own agency, Velvet Hammer Design, and brings her design roots to B2C and B2B experiences. Thank you for joining us, Bern. Next, we have Carol Rossi. Carol leads her own research leadership consulting business, bringing her years of leadership experience at Kelley Blue Book, Edmunds, and NerdWallet to her clients. She's taught both at Art Center and Santa Monica College and is a published author and speaker. Thank you for joining us today, Carol.
Hi.
And last but not least, we have David Vitko. David is the founder of Octave Labs and a seasoned technology executive for many successful new ventures. David has led numerous cross-functional teams geographically spread across the globe, which requires navigating many cultural and language communication challenges. His experience mentoring companies, as well as leading both technology and product teams, makes him well suited for this discussion. Thank you, David, for joining us today.
Glad to be here.
And without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Chris and Wendy to kick things off. So, Chris, why don't you take us away?
Well, before that, I just wanted to point out that I put on the chat a couple of links, one for Justin's info with his company and his book, and then Carol's workshop on prioritizing research for impact. And I'll just put those links back at the end of the session as well.
Thank you, Wendy.
Yep.
Right on. Well, I want to start it off with a quick question for each panelist, and maybe Bern, you can start us off. But we've all come across that one person who's really great at communication and can just get the collaboration going with something they say. And I'm looking for a story from you of who that person is and how they pulled that off.
Yeah, I guess I'll actually point to one of my mentors, and his name is Errol Gerson. Errol recently finished 50 years at Art Center. And I think part of the way and my favorite story about Errol is he will always start a conversation or have an anecdote. He's actually from South Africa. And he often uses that proverb, like, if you want to go somewhere fast, you go it alone. If you want to get there, you go together, right? And so he uses that quite often when we're starting an engagement or we're in a group setting, and he sets the tone. And I think as a communicator, he uses story in a way that welcomes people into the room and invites conversation. So I would say Errol is my go-to mentor and model.
I love that. Carol, how about you? What's your story on a good communicator?
Yeah, I'm thinking of a couple of people who have this way of just like readily tossing ideas out with the spirit of making the work better without ego. So it's not like this is my idea, that's their idea or whatever. It's just like, you know, we're addressing a topic and the thoughts just flow. And then I feel like for me, that really helps me make my work better by just getting some either feedback on something that I put out there that's really not very good necessarily the first time around, or you know, or hearing something that they've started with.
No, that's excellent. Justin.
Yeah, I suppose I'll keep it a little more macro, given the sensitivity or what I'll say. But I find like the best communicator is often the one who has done work in a personal capacity with a therapist. I think a good therapist will tell you the key to any successful, healthy relationship and engagement is healthy communication. And I think that goes to personal or professional relationships. And, you know, communication in of itself is a tangible action of a broader mindset. It's not all about you. Like Carol said, being humble, like being devoid of ego. And we communicate well and early and often because setting expectations is setting the recipient up for success as much as it is like giving, you know, a shared sense of accountability. So I think, you know, being a good communicator is a beautiful mix of looking out for number one, as much as it is for looking out for others, as much as it is looking out for the bigger picture.
I love that. Yeah. David,
Yeah.
what's your good communicator story?
Yeah, I have a early on in my career, I had a CIO at a pretty large healthcare organization who was responsible for a lot of people and a lot of sort of different divisions. But what was interesting and I think impactful from that I learned from him was he had a very open door policy, and got to know people. So it wasn't just, depending on when you come in or a different department, he sort of learned your name, which was interesting, and a little bit about you, even at scale, and even with all the rest of the responsibilities. And I think that made people a lot more at ease when we ended up having to have meetings together, which provided sort of that open communication, and allowed people to be sort of, rather than being on edge, being comfortable in those discussions. And I think we sort of got a lot out of that.
That's amazing. Yeah, it's really amazing when somebody at such a huge organization might do that.
Yeah, which I think it's a good segue into something that we've been wanting to talk about, which is, so you have these people like this C-level person that you're talking about, Dave, that kind of initiates this environment of communication and openness, right? And so it kind of sets the tone for the company and for the groups and how to communicate. And then the thing that I was wondering about is what happens when we're working on things and things come up that might impact the business goals, the business vision, and how, if maybe the environment is not as open, how do you guys see this working as from maybe like the bottom up into the C-suite? I don't know, Carol, maybe you want to talk to us about some of your experiences with something like that?
Yeah, I think, this is not, this isn't brilliant. Like everybody on the call is aware that, like, especially in a leadership role, we have to manage the people that report to us, we have to manage across, and we have to manage up. And I know for me, one of the things that I did really well for a long time in my career was manage across when I was more in an IC role. And then when I started to manage people, I found that I was doing a really good job of managing them in some cases. But it took me too long to figure out how to manage up. And I think that's where the kind of situation that you're talking about comes in, right? Like we don't necessarily, now I think there's a lot more conversation than there was maybe earlier in my career about this. But I think that's where it's really important to have communication in all of those directions. And so if something comes up that changes the plan, scope, whatever, not only is it someone, that communication can happen in all the directions that it needs to. So I feel like that's, does somebody have a question or a comment? I think that's one thing. And I think another thing is just to, how are we now? Of course, we've got like zillions of tools that we can use to communicate what's happening with the work, whether we have Jira or Asana or whatever the pieces are, right? Slack. And so using those tools to communicate as much as we can, so that people aren't blindsided when something's changing, and, get to know as much ahead of time as possible that something could be changing that could impact their work, et cetera.
Bern, you're nodding a lot. It looks like you might have something to say.
This is one that's near and dear to my heart, because I think one of the basic tenets, and we did this as a team on several teams, and I really appreciate it, is we kind of created a user guide for our kind of communication, because I love tools, but the tools that appeal to me don't appeal to everyone. And many of you who know me know, I'm like, yeah, if you want to, email is where stuff you send me goes to die, right? There are levels of communication where things will be picked up. And so we had a conversation as a team, which is, what is your preferred communication? What does it mean if you call me? What does it mean if you text me? When should you call me? And I think there is a basic understanding for me that I really think about the audience person. Okay, this is my executive. They have this much time, this much bandwidth. What is that key thing I need? And what is the means? Like, you learn people's patterns. I have a wonderful leader, and I know that she is up early. And I know if I drop a few key lines to her, they will get read. If I try to hit her during the day, she's not going to get to it. And so I always encourage people really to think about communication and the audience. It's like anything. It's who am I trying to reach, and what do they need to know? Don't, if we have, and I've had this, and I've had to have conversations, I've had people not escalate to me soon enough. And I'm like, don't worry. I'd rather you tell me, you chat this at me, you call me. If we're down, I want to know immediately. So I think people have this fear of communicating. And I'm like, it's worse when you don't tell me. It's always worse when you don't tell me.
Yeah, definitely. I've been hearing more and more about this movement of understanding other people's communication styles to collaborate better, which I think it's really nice, especially in this time that we are living now, that there's a lot of remote work, and really getting to know people more at a human level is what is going to get us into better collaboration. Does anybody else in the panel want to say something about this particular point, or we can move on to something else? Chris, maybe?
Okay.
Good.
Well, it sounds like we're moving on, I guess.
Well, something I would like to add that has been very beneficial for me as well, and a practice that I've done in my previous careers as well. Pick up the phone. It's just as simple as that. There's nothing more special than actually having a conversation and have a real experience with a human. So pick up the phone, like set up some time, talk. It's just, we get so buried into our digital experiences that we forget sometimes that human touch and element. So just throwing that out there.
Yeah.
I think one of the things you were saying, Wendy, and I'll stop talking because I want to hear from other people, but one of the things you're talking about with professional styles is I've seen different organizations, whether they use Myers-Briggs or they use DISC or they use Emergenetics, really use that opportunity, that workshopping of your communication style or your work profile, to raise questions in a safe way, right? Because you do this workshop, you all take a test. It's like your Cosmo quiz. You're like, woo, woo, I'm green, I'm a disc, I have high drive or whatever. But what it does is it makes it safe to talk about the human aspects. Because normally you're like, we talk about work. We don't talk about feelings. We don't talk about styles. This is work. So having those kind of mechanisms is just an opportunity to open up the human conversation.
Yeah, definitely. And one of the reasons why we decided to have this panel is because we've been hearing more and more about research back information data that we have that says that groups that collaborate and have good communication styles, and it's more than just they deal with things and talk about things that are more than just work, are higher performing teams and higher performing groups and companies. So we thought that this was a good way to initiate, or, to just bring that conversation to a broader group, to see what are the challenges that people are encountering, and what are the things that we have seen and can do from all of our different positions. So Chris, I think you have something to follow on that.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about this in the Senate meeting. And Justin, I have a question for you to start off, at least. Most companies have certain rituals in place to facilitate communication and get people to talk and work together. And I was curious what those rituals are for you, and what you seem that bring in humanness and personal practice into making the work, what we're doing, more meaningful, more human.
It's a great question. And I think it's near and dear to most of us, if not all of us on this call. And I think first and foremost, how much you get out of a ritual is determined about how mindfully it's designed in advance. Like, what are its requirements? What are its output? What are its desired goals and outcomes? And how do all these facets align with fulfillment for the participants? I think being mindful about the rituals we craft removes that kind of like, why didn't this work? Caliber mindset from just throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks. To that point, very specifically, I've run this session with teams I've run or organizations I've led. It's called Creative Inspiration Wednesday. And essentially what we do in a inspiration and collaborative sense is we don't work. We stop at around 9:30 in the morning, and we take about, I don't know, a half hour, 45 minutes. And we talk about what has inspired us over the previous week. And that could be something we ate. It could be a piece of music we listened to. It could be something we saw, a gallery we've been to. And the goal is to put humanity at the forefront of our interactions. Understand that this person that is talking through what inspired them is a unique individual with unique insights, and it helps foster non-homogeneous thinking, and it helps us connect with someone, instead of putting a name to an email, this is giving a soul to that name then. So I think it takes it a level deeper. And, when we first started doing this, people would walk by in the hall, they would kind of stop and be like, what the hell are these folks doing? They're listening to music or they're not working. And I would invite them in. It'd be someone from development or be someone from product management. We'd welcome them in, and they'd get curious, and then they would join, and then they would present something. And it just is this, because there are values behind it, and it's people first and actions over a bumper sticker. The beauty of it is value-driven initiatives or mindsets transcend in-person or remote seating. So I've done this in the in-person capacity. I've done this in the remote capacity. And I think, because we know the outcome is to put people first and to collaborate and connect and to be inspired, the outputs then and the outcomes of that are very organically generated. So that's one example.
I love that. That's amazing. It's pretty similar to something we do, but maybe gives you a bit more sense of who these people are that you spend a good chunk of your waking hours with. So that's amazing. Anybody else have any comment on that on the panel? David?
Yeah, I've got an example. I don't know if it's quite the same, but we'll see if it sort of covers. I think one of the important things about sort of that encouraging communication is people feeling like they belong. Justin, you were just talking about it, right? How do you sort of break across those boundaries? Now, I've got examples where, my teams are 12, sort of 12 hours away, and how do you sort of bridge that gap, right, with essentially people that you're bringing on that are not necessarily part of your team, and historically probably have not ever felt like they were part of a team that they were joined to. So for me, what's important is right away is to communicate that sort of this team, an offshore team, for my case, I'm a technologist, right, is an extension of the team that I have. So I'll use an example, Chris, and this goes back to a company that you and I both know, which is LeisureLink way back when. We had a team that was offshore in Armenia. And for us, we created what was called our LeisureLink East and LeisureLink West teams, right? With LeisureLink West being positioned in Pasadena and LeisureLink East being sort of in Yerevan. And that was sort of the first step. But everything that we did, communication around what were the company's goals, how were we doing, were shared with that team as well. All the way down to, on one of my visits, I brought a flag because there was a sort of a flagpole or a series of flagpoles out in front of their office with, other companies that were in that business park that were being represented there. And so I brought out a flag and we hung a LeisureLink flag out there, and probably half the people had no idea who that was. But for that team itself, they knew that they were part of the overall goal of that organization. So when things got difficult, right, and you've got deadlines and you have to call somebody up in the middle of the night, they answer, right, which is great, right? So it's just part of sort of extending that. So hopefully that sort of fits in this category.
Yeah, it gives a sense of belonging, right? I mean,
yeah,
you're part of the team, even if you are on the other side of the earth.
100%.
Yeah, which takes me to so those were kind of both examples. I mean, Justin had a little bit of the bringing in people from other disciplines that were just like walking by and whatnot, and wanted to see what the cool kids were doing. But when we take that to project work, right, so one of the things that we set for this was the cross-discipline kind of collaboration. And I wanted to put it out to you guys and see if you can give me some guidance on this interdiscipline collaboration. How does that happen? Is it, you might have, like these big teams, or does it happen in like one-on-one situations? Is it both? So if someone wants to get started with some conversation around that, who wants to start with that?
I can jump in.
Carol, yeah.
Yeah, I think, from the research perspective, research has to be collaborative, right? I mean, I think that we're way, 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 way past days when researchers would go off and do a research project and like put a report over the wall. So I think we've been, over the last many years, we've been really strong at pulling the design, product, and partners in, first of all, figuring out what the question is that we're trying to understand, and prioritizing the most important projects that are going to have the biggest impact. And I think that's a place where maybe we haven't been as strong. I think we've been really stronger once we get a study started and making sure everybody's involved in understanding what we're doing in terms of sharing a research plan, whether it's a big study or a tiny study, right? and getting others to observe either live sessions or watch videos from sessions or whatever the data is that we have, and getting people involved in synthesis and getting people involved in sort of the end of it. But I think at the two extremes, at the kind of very beginning in terms of prioritizing the work, and at the very end in terms of making the insights actionable and then determining and understanding the impact of the research, we haven't been as strong as maybe we need to be consistently. And so that's one of the areas where I see we've done really well in the middle phase when we're actually running the study. And we need to have these ends of prioritizing at the beginning and measuring impact at the end be much, much stronger. So I think that's it's sort of a mix, right? In terms of the ways that we've been able to do this well and places we still have work to do.
And what are some of the ways that you know that would improve those two parts?
Well, I think take my workshop. No, I'm kidding.
Hey, why not?
But I mean, this is why
September 11th, people. It's in the chat.
Yeah, this is why I've been hyper focused on trying to help researchers and design leaders that are leading research, but maybe don't have a research manager or director in their reporting structure. Think through what are the most important business questions that are going to have impact to the business, rather than we want to do a study. Because I think it's really easy for the teams working on products to say, we want to do a study. We need to do a usability study. Okay, why? Why do you need that study? What business metric are you trying to use? How important is this thing, right, to the overall business? How important is it based on, like, what do you already know? Do we already know enough that we don't need to do another study? Is it going to be so much faster to just put it out there and see what happens rather than do the research? And you have to pull those levers, right? So like, if it's a very high risk project that's going to have incredible impact to the business, that's very important. If we don't know anything and it's going to be really expensive to develop, then we should make an investment in research. And the opposite, if the opposite things are relevant. So I think that's sort of one, like really thoroughly examining that. And that thorough conversation can be a half-hour conversation. It doesn't need to be like delving in, right? And then at the other end, making sure we know what the impact is by going back and looking at it. Okay, when we did a study, we delivered insights, the team sat together and decided, here's the action we're going to take as a result of those insights. Hopefully that all goes into some final summary of the study. Here's the action we're going to take, here's when. And then we can go back later and say, okay, what were the results of the A/B test? Did we see the % lift that we were looking for in this area in engagement or revenue or whatever the measures are? Did we see an increase in customer satisfaction if that's the thing we're trying to measure? So having that sort of thread of what's the business impact running all the way through from the very beginning, and then checking in at the end to see what the impact was, which can be hard. As a researcher, you might be embedded on 3 or 4 teams, and then you're not with that same group a month later when the results come out. So you kind of have to just put a note on your calendar sometimes to go back and chat with them and see what happened there.
Right. Anybody else on the team that would like to compliment what Carol's talking about here?
Just wanted to mention Brady shouted out in the chat. She says that a Google design sprint is a great way to pull together people from across teams and socialize the value of fast iteration and user research. So that's a good point, Brady.
Yeah, thanks.
I think both Brady's comment and what Carol shared what was coming to mind as you were talking through the phases and how quickly you're moving on to the next and not being with someone, right? Like you're on to the next project. And to me, I think it's this mindful work of understanding someone's contribution and minding the exits and entrances, right? Because you're on to the next thing. And, you know, people, like I find there's often not enough measurement. I'm like, did it work? I know we're making something else, but did it work? And I think that what I try to do, and I know my team, we work on this, is really to come up with a couple of points where we're stopping and we're pulling out, like, you know, old school studio. Let's throw it up on the wall, pull back. Where are we? and that mindful way, and I think where you were going, Wendy, was how do you get people from different camps, and in essence, different camps are, you're in marketing, you're over here in research, you're over there in production. Are we even talking? And I think it's that mindful contribution. And what I'm always surprised about is how many meetings before the meeting, before the conversation I'm doing to help kind of keep that, to grease the flow, to have those joints oiled.
Yeah.
And so that contribution, and then I'm like, well, am I just, trying to win social capital? What I'm trying to do is reinforce with people how important their contribution is. I'm not calling you into a meeting because I want to take 30 days of your life away or whatever. I need you. And if I give a name to what your contribution is and your need is, I'm also mindful when I look at it and go, oh, you don't really need to be here for these 2 hours, but I'm taking the ticket. I want this later. So I think it's being mindful of the contribution, naming that for the party, and then living it. Because if I only do this at the beginning and I don't hit you later up, you're going to be like, that was you checking a box. That was not you collaborating or engaging with me.
Yeah. That's really interesting to name the contribution.
Yeah. And do it publicly, right? With the two people, so that, there is the sense of
recognition,
shared vision, and
well, that's what David's symbol was, right? Like that was the ultimate naming. You are one of us. I am bringing you a flag. I mean, it doesn't get, there's no better symbol, David. And I think it was so meaningful, like a flag or a symbol of something, of inclusion.
Yeah.
That carries weight. It was great.
Yeah.
Yeah. Something they walk into each day and see. So.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Well, I know for certain from working with David that I valued the partnership between design and development as one of those kind of micro teams where we can do some partnership things, whether it's from whoever's doing the micro interaction design is working with the front end developer, at a very small level to make wins. But that's really then they come to with the full team and say, here's what we came up with. That's beautiful. That's so much more powerful than here's what I came up with,
Yeah, it's usually a better solution, right? Because if I'm coming up with it, it's wrong.
I don't think that's true. So.
Yeah, no, that's not true.
Okay. We kind of started talking about this research question. But one of the things I was asking, and I think this question, we can start with Carol. But since it's such a foundational thing to product research, how do you get people to input what you do prioritize? Because there's so much in the research that has value to research everything, right? There's value in just about everything. So you really need to prioritize your time because you can't just research everything. How do you get input from various disciplines on that prioritization process?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what I've seen work. So there are different ways to do it, right? And it just depends on the environment. I mean, the answer to everything is it depends. So like, what is the culture? How broad is the research that needs to be done? So do we have a situation where we've got a couple of researchers and they're embedded or partially embedded with teams so they understand what's happening more deeply in those few teams? Do we have a situation where we have one researcher that's spread across, let's say, 10 pods in a smallish medium company, right? Or do we have a situation where we don't have researchers, but we need to either the research needs to be done by designers that are going to wear a research hat, or PMs, or we are going to use agency? Like, it depends on the situation. But I think you can either set up a practice of gathering requests through even a Google form, or something that goes straight into your Jira queue, Trello, Asana, whatever you're using. I've done that. And so everybody knows they fill out the form, it comes in, whoever's responsible, researcher, whatever, research manager, checks that out, goes back, has a conversation if they need to, figure out what the need is there. Is there a real need? Again, assessing what do we already know about it? What's the risk of not doing more research at this point? What's the cost of doing research? What's the cost of developing? So according to that assessment, another thing is, obviously, if researchers are on board and they're partially or fully embedded, then they know what's happening. And that's actually ideal, because then they can predict, oh, we know we're going to need to understand something that's coming up. We don't need to be reactive in terms of taking a request. We can understand what the needs are of the team. What are the bigger business questions that are going to come up? And hopefully in a more sophisticated team, a higher UX maturity, there's an opportunity for the researcher to be doing some of that pre-prioritization. So the researcher can go to the team and say, you know what, I know you guys think this is important, but here's what we already know about that topic based on work that's been done before. So we don't need to do more research there. We can focus. I mean, I'm like a weird researcher that says, don't do more research, do less, but do stuff that's going to be more impactful. So, and then also the other piece is like figuring out with prioritization, one of the things you might say at the end of doing this prioritization exercise, again, is it 30 minutes or it takes longer, is like, well, we need to do something, but we don't think we need the career researcher to do a big study. We think this is a case where maybe the designer does a usability study on something they've already done some research on, but we do see a need for an extra study there, and we're going to help them do it, if they're not familiar already with doing that. And so that's a way that we can collaborate, upskill somebody on the team that maybe hasn't done that before, but it frees up the career researchers to address the bigger questions, because we know we've prioritized those bigger questions because the company needs that information more than something else.
I love that, upskilling people to do throw a broader net than the career researchers are few and far between. So
yeah, which is hugely controversial in some circles. There's a giant fight about whether it's okay for non-researchers to do research, and I just don't waste time fighting about it anymore. I'm just trying to help people do it better at this point.
Yeah.
Well,
But I think that fight is everywhere, right? The minute someone moves out of their lane. So when you talk about, like, it's the same fight. What do you mean you're letting designers do prototyping? I'm like, what do you mean I'm not?
Yeah.
Right? Like there is that's the spirit of the pairing, the collaboration, and upskilling does lead people with deep expertise to tackle harder problems, but the benefit for others is immense.
Totally.
Yeah. Bern, to your point, I think in any discipline, the way somebody approaches it from outside of the discipline is kind of interesting. So when a non-designer gives me feedback on the design, I'm always going to listen, because hey, this person is going to look at it differently than I did. So that's pretty cool.
Sometimes Chris, because I had this conversation with you when we brought you in, specifically, the one comment I made to you was, please don't let us internally have control of the outcome of the thing that we are not very good at. Because in the end, we were a whole bunch of analytic people, and we cared about numbers and charts and graphs and everything else. And that was the thing that we were trying to move away from, to tell a really good story to users who we didn't obviously have a full command of, and that wasn't our user population. And so sometimes you just have to bring people in who are better at stuff, and then let them do what they do well. Right. And for us, that was a much better outcome, right? Because we knew what the first version of that was. It was a bad experience and low usage of a product. And then having you guys come in and do what you do best, right? That we didn't have as a skill. was really just, we needed to stay out of your way. And that wasn't always easy, but it was hugely impactful.
See, if everybody could recognize that kind of thing themselves, all of us would have a much easier job. But that's a great point, David.
Yeah, it definitely is. That brings me to another point, which is, so that David, that showed a real commitment to the project and to the success of the business, to see, what was needed. In this case, that we stepped in at the right time and that people listened. And so you showed a commitment to that collaboration, right? And to honoring that and respecting the team, which is huge. But there are times when people don't want to collaborate, especially in this time of remote work. People have more flexibility, they can work whenever they want. And so the collaboration is harder sometimes to do, even though we have like all of these tools, right? So Justin, you've been super quiet. So I want to give you the chance to pipe in here if you like. And maybe we can talk about like the challenges of this collaboration, communication, and what can we do to foster and bring more goodness to our workspaces.
Yeah, certainly. It's not an easy question to answer, right? Because I think the challenges are always evolving. And I think when we have a mindset of, I'll come back to humility and being students of our discipline and students of leadership, I think that helps us evolve and meet the challenge. So just some baseline stuff. I think async is a given, right? Like first and foremost, we have to be respectful of people's schedules and energy, given the state of the world and responsibilities with family and around the house, etc. And there need to be points of collaboration for real-time connection. And you can see like some of the software that grew so popular via necessity in the onset of the pandemic, like Zoom, adapting even further to include like always open chat. I think they were just touting that feature, like where the Zoom room is like always open and you can always jump in ad hoc and put stuff in there. It's like a centralized communication hub, I guess, that is omnipresent, and you can see various forms of tooling doing something in that capacity. But broadly, I think the balance between fixed FaceTime touch points, like 5 minutes for a good morning or a check-in, in tandem with the respect for real life responsibilities, I think that's going to be a continued sweet spot. And this to me is people first as an organizational value represented tangibly in actions over words. I think organizational values need to not only be equally represented, they have to be as equally represented in actions as they are printed collateral. And I think that's a big disconnect that a lot of organizations drop the ball on. And they also need to keep pace with an ever-changing social landscape. There's that, it's in the news all the time that you must come into the office corporate mantra is in stark contrast with many employees preferring to work remotely, which is causing massive friction with connection. I think that's a real-time example of such values stagnancy leading to mass disconnection and attrition and quality of work impact and on and on. So, it's a muddled answer because I think it's a complex solution. And I think as long as we are able to be adaptive and to lead with humility and to listen to folks and to respond to how things change week over week, I think that helps us, be malleable and hopefully get to a better place.
Love that.
Yeah.
You look like you're nodding your head. What do you do when somebody doesn't want to collaborate?
I think this one is near and dear to my heart because I can sometimes be that person who doesn't want to collaborate, right? Like I'm like, I got this. I don't want your input. I'm not interested. I'm going to figure it out. I got the answer, right? I've been very successful doing that. Now, I say that all New York bravado, right? Snap, snap, later for you. But in the reality, what I have learned now that I am older and wiser is that I need to be curious about that. And the same way I know that can be true in me, that helps me open up to what might be happening for a person. And what I love that you said, Justin, was being conscious of asynchronous, what's happening in a person, being curious about where they are today, right? Like even, you've walked into, you're doing a workshop and you can read and feel different body languages, whether that is in person or virtual. You see it. We're in a world of makers, our response to people. And I think it's quite often just that curiosity so that I don't jump to what's your problem? Why aren't you working with me on the other side of the aisle? To maybe you had a very interesting conversation with your boss, or maybe I don't realize that your department thinks it's in competition with me and I don't know that. So that's why you don't want to play with me. Right? Because it might not be in the interest for you individually because there are politics that I'm not aware of. So I think that idea of always assuming people want to collaborate without doing the homework and being curious about the situation and context you're working into is a dangerous one. It's dangerous when you're a consultant and you land on a ground and you think you're all shiny and new and they're welcoming you. Not everybody welcomes you. Sometimes they think you're here to figure out ways to make them disappear, right? It is really being open, and this is the woo-woo part. So we've moved from New York snap snap to California woo-woo, right? There's also that part of just respecting your gut. If you're sensing something is wrong, give it a moment and just kind of look at it and know what you own versus what you don't. And then, see if some other people are getting that same read, because half the time when you ignore it, that thing's going to bite you in the ass. New York is back, bite you in the ass, right? Later in the project. So I think it's a balance, but I think it's being curious and imagining that they may not want to play.
Yeah. And modeling that, right? Because if we are seeing that and we get into that same wavelength, then we're not going to get anywhere, right? And so I guess that's kind of like the New York, LA kind of thing that you're saying. But I think it is this job that we have of this self-awareness of not only knowing ourselves, but knowing how to perceive what is going on. And it can be really hard in this online, all virtual environment. So it takes extra time and effort for us to reach out and say, hey, I noticed you were really quiet on this topic or in this meeting. Is there something that you want to talk about? Or reaching out is like super important. And at the same time, acknowledging the boundaries that people have. So this is the other part that we were talking about earlier of knowing what the preference of people's communication styles are, right? I know, Jorge, you were saying, just pick up the phone. I just got off of a user interview yesterday that the woman's like, don't call me. I don't want you to interrupt what I'm doing. And I have to be on top of what you want to talk to me in that moment, because that's important to you. I don't want to be interrupted. I don't want to talk on the phone. Send me a message. We can set up time to talk. So I think that, we're human, right? And we're all different. And this is beautiful, because if we were all the same, it would be boring. And we just have to learn how to work with each other, be patient, compassionate. That's why we're in the UX field, right? Most of us. We just have to bring that empathy and compassion that we have for our users to all of the people that we work with. And
for sure,
it's hard. It's hard, but hey, that's our mission here. That's our purpose. I don't even know where we are now, Chris. Get us back into.
Can I ask a question? And I know, Kevin, you said something when you came on, but I think one of the interesting things, and Justin, I'm pointing this one to you because one of the things one of my favorite books is a Justin book. I use this with my team. So you can give me money later, Justin. Look, we're all pulling out our books. Creative culture.
Wow.
But I think there is this false belief that teams have to be in harmony. Like everything's always happy. And like harmony is what we are aiming for. Like I don't want fist fights, but I think that there should be tension and it can be okay to be unpleasant. So when you talk about creating cultures or creative cultures and collaboration, I don't think it always ends with a smile. Sometimes there can be tension. Are there things you would say as we build cultures, Justin, like how do you traverse that? Because like, let's talk about Jorge wants a call, but Wendy's user doesn't. How do you harmonize, and is it okay to live with a little bit of tension?
Yeah, absolutely. It's certainly not unicorns and rainbows in any capacity. And I think viewing humans as unique individuals and being respectful. Everyone's made magnificent points here, and Wendy, you said I'm being quiet. It's largely because I think the panelists and the questions have been absolutely brilliant. So I'm kind of in awe of everyone's insights thus far. And to me, that is the onset and impetus for non-homogeneous thinking and diverse and inclusive output. And I think the synergies between having that mindset between what we craft, how we interact with one another, and what we're ultimately producing. I think that trifecta of being mindful of not everyone being in the same space, or people coming from different backgrounds, or people having good days versus bad days. I think as leaders, when someone has an off day, that then becomes our day to help them out and help them through that, because our sense of reward should be coming from the output and the goals achievement of those on our team. So, there's no clear answer for there's no framework or platform, if you will, from how to get to point A to point B in that respect, because everyone is unique, and it's a non-trivial feat to make sure that collaboration is as smooth as humanly possible when people are having off days, or people are on vacation, or people don't have their camera on, or some people are in the office, or some people are forced into the office just to open and have a Zoom meeting, which to me melts my brain that some organizations still do that. So, I think when we lead with our values and we are crystal clear on what our values are, I think, I'll come back to what I said earlier, agnostic of remote or in-person seat, that should get us toward a more inclusive and effective space, because we are living driven by values that inform both our personal and our professional fulfillment. So as leaders, I think it's, inherent and incumbent upon us to understand what our team members' values are. Are they in misalignment or in alignment with what the business's ethics and values are? And to make sure, if they're not, that we can kind of get them to a more healthy spot.
That's a great.
Excellent. And I couldn't have asked for a better wrap up to our session. I couldn't believe, I looked up at the time and I'm like, really? Is it really almost an hour that we've spent together here? I don't know. I have like this thing in me. I was like, can we do this again next Friday? So anyway,
Justin said therapy. This feels like therapy to me.
I know,
This
right?
is therapy, totally.
So I know we didn't have a lot of time for questions, but please, if you have any other questions and you want to just like bring it to the panel here, you can just unmute yourself and do it, or you can put it in the chat, whatever is most comfortable for you. I want to be respectful of people's time. I see that some people are saying that, yes, next Friday. Okay, so people are collecting notes. Kevin says he's collected a lot of notes, great wisdom. So thank you, everyone from the panel. I don't see any questions. Anybody has any questions?
I've got some. I can just chime in quickly with some
Okay,
stuff here,
go
unless
for it.
because while people are, if anyone's thinking of questions, writing them in the chat, we probably will do another panel in the future. I don't know about next Friday. It might be a little fast, but we
Well, just message me if you want to talk next Friday. I'm available.
Sure. But we'll be sharing this recording on LinkedIn for everyone to rewatch, and if you want to comment on something you want to hear a panel on in the future or have an idea, feel free to throw a comment there. And Wendy, can you throw a link to our LinkedIn there, so if people don't already have us, go ahead and give us a follow. And I think you already shared the some of these other resources here. So Justin, if you want more insights from Justin, feel free to check out his new book, In Fulfillment: The Designer's Journey, and the link is up there in the chat. And if you want to hear get more insights from Carol, she's doing that 2-day workshop on prioritizing research for impact. So we have all that, and then let's see, and
then of course you can follow all of the speakers, of course, Justin, Bern, Carol, and David.
Yep.
Great stuff.
Yeah, and stay tuned for more panels like this. So we'll do more stuff like this in the future, probably on a variety of topics, but that's where we'll be sharing it. So
yeah, if there are any favorite topics you want us to cover, just give us a shout, either Chris or I on LinkedIn, or you can send us an email at ignite@primaspark.com. And yeah, we'd be happy to host another one.
Especially
we love
with
talking.
such an amazing group of smart people as today.
Really, we like collaborating.
All of your time.
Yes.
And thanks for everybody for joining us too. It was quite a RSVP list.
Yes. Sure. Thank you, everybody. Yes. Thank you.
And thank you, P-Spark, for putting this on. You always bring
great.
good info. So thank you all.
Yes. Thank you, Chris and Wendy, for hosting it.
All right.
All right. Have a great weekend.
Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful
Thanks, folks.
Friday. Bye.
All right.
Bye-bye.